The message light blinked again on the main screen of the verdant ship. Another insult, another mockery. Green Sky turned away from it, his leafy skin darkening with shame. The Galactic Assembly never tired of reminding the Moss people of their weakness. Useless plants. The latest message read, "Why do you even bother having ships? You can't fight. You can't defend yourselves. Go back to your world and rot." Green Sky's assistant, Bright Leaf, gently touched his leader's shoulder. "Should we send another request for protection?" he asked, his voice rustling like wind through trees. "They'll only laugh again," Green Sky replied. Their ship, the Garden's Hope, drifted at the edge of their solar system. They had come this far to terraform a dead moon, but raiders had chased them away. Again. The Moss people were peaceful by nature. Their bodies, made of plant-like cells that could photosynthesize light into energy, were designed for creation, not destruction. They could turn lifeless rocks into gardens, dead worlds into paradises. But in a galaxy that valued weapons over flowers, their greatest gift had become their greatest curse. A new alert flashed on their screens. An unknown ship had entered their system. Green Sky's leaves trembled, but he stood tall. They couldn't run again. Their fuel reserves were too low. "Unknown vessel approaching," Bright Leaf announced, his voice shaking. It's nothing like the assembly designs we know." The ship that appeared on their screen was strange indeed. Its hull was smooth and white, with blue markings along its side. No weapon ports were visible, though that didn't mean much. Most raiders kept their weapons hidden until the last moment. "This is Captain Reed of the Earth vessel Starseeker," a voice came through their communicator. The language was new, but their universal translator handled it well. "We detected your distress beacon. Do you need assistance?" Green Sky and Bright Leaf exchanged looks. Earth. They had never heard of it. The assembly controlled most of known space, and they had never mentioned this species. "We are the Moss people of Verdant," Green Sky responded carefully. We have little of value. Raiders have already taken most of our supplies." There was a pause, then the human captain spoke again. "We're not raiders. We're explorers. This is our first mission beyond our solar system, and you're the first alien species we've encountered. Would you allow us to approach and offer help?" The sincerity in the voice was unlike anything Green Sky had heard from other species. Still, centuries of mockery and abuse had taught them caution. "How do we know we can trust you?" "You don't," Captain Reed replied honestly. "But where I come from, helping those in need is considered honorable. We have extra fuel, food, and medical supplies if you need them. No payment required." Bright Leaf's colors shifted to show his hope, but Green Sky remained cautious. "The assembly says helping the weak is foolish. They say we deserve our fate for being peaceful." The human's response was immediate and firm. "Then we already disagree with this assembly. On Earth, we've learned that peaceful doesn't mean weak. Some of our planet's strongest creatures are herbivores who would rather avoid conflict." For the first time in years, Green Sky felt something like hope. This species, these humans, spoke differently than the others. They didn't immediately mock or threaten. They offered help without demanding submission. "We accept your help," Green Sky finally said. "And perhaps we can offer something in return. We may not have weapons or riches, but we can make gardens grow where nothing has grown before." "Now that," Captain Reed replied warmly, "sounds like the beginning of a fascinating conversation." As the human ship drew closer, Green Sky watched their sensors carefully. But for once, there was no trick, no hidden threat. Just an unexpected hand of friendship extended across the stars. The mockery of the assembly still stung, but for the first time, Green Sky wondered if perhaps the galaxy was bigger than they had been led to believe. Perhaps somewhere out there, among the stars, there were others who saw value in creation rather than destruction. The Garden's Hope had never felt more appropriately named. Captain Reed stood in amazement as he watched the Moss people's demonstration. On the observation deck of the Star Seeker, Green Sky and Bright Leaf had set up a small terrarium. What was once bare rock now sprouted with tiny green shoots. 3 hours, Reed whispered. You did this in 3 hours. Green Sky's leaves rustled with pride. This is but a small example. Given time and resources, we can transform entire planets. The ship's scientist, Dr. Miller, couldn't take her eyes off the readings. The molecular transformation rate is incredible. They're not just growing plants. They're changing the mineral composition of the rock itself. This is why the assembly hates us, Bright Leaf said quietly. They fear what we can create. They keep us weak by telling everyone we are useless. Reed's face hardened. He'd spent the last day reviewing the messages the Moss people had received from the assembly. Each one made his blood boil more than the last. How many worlds have they prevented you from helping? Hundreds, Green Sky answered. We receive distress calls from colonies on dying worlds, planets where crops won't grow. But the assembly forbids us from helping. They say such worlds deserve to fail. Dr. Miller looked up from her readings. Captain, the agricultural applications alone, Earth's desert regions, the struggling colonies on Mars. With their help, we cooled. We could feed millions. Reed finished. He turned to Green Sky. Would you be willing to help us? Earth would offer protection in return. Real protection, not mockery. Before Green Sky could answer, alarms blared through both ships. Bright Leaf rushed to their sensors. Assembly patrol ships, 3 of them. The largest assembly ship's commander appeared on their screen. His scaled face showed disgust. Well, the walking weeds found some new friends. Listen carefully, unknown vessel. These creatures are under assembly control. Leave now or face the consequences. Reed stood straight, his voice calm but firm. These creatures are under Earth's protection now. We've seen what they can do, and we won't let you waste their gifts anymore. The assembly commander laughed. You fool. What can you possibly? His words cut off as Reed pressed a button. The Star Seeker's hull plates shifted, revealing rows of defense systems that had been hidden before. Unlike the Moss people's ship, Earth had come prepared for a hostile universe. We're peaceful, Reed said quietly, but we protect our friends. Your choice, Commander. Leave or discover if your assembly's weapons are as good as they claim. The assembly ships hung there for a long moment. Then, slowly, they turned away. The commander's final message dripped with venom. The assembly will hear of this. Good, Reed replied. Tell them Earth says hello. After the assembly ships vanished, Green Sky turned to Reed. You would truly face the assembly for us. Why? Reed smiled. Because Dr. Miller is right. Your abilities could help so many people. But more than that, you remind us of who we want to be. Humanity spent centuries fighting among ourselves before we learned that creation matters more than destruction. He gestured to the thriving terrarium. This is the future we want. Not warships and threats, but growing things. Making dead worlds live again. If the assembly can't see that value, then they're blinder than we thought. Green Sky's color brightened with joy. Then perhaps we could show you our larger terraforming projects. We have ships ready, if you truly mean to protect us. We do, Reed said firmly, and I think this is the beginning of something remarkable. He turned to his communications officer. Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we found friends who can help us garden the stars. As both crews began to plan, the small terrarium continued to grow, its tiny plants reaching toward the light of distant suns. Like the friendship forming between their species, it was just the beginning of something much bigger to come. 3 months after first contact, Earth's fastest ships formed a protective ring around the Moss people's first major terraforming project. The dead moon of Nexus 7 stretched below them, its gray surface already showing patches of green. Admiral Stone watched from the bridge of the Earth flagship Guardian as another assembly ship approached. They had been coming regularly now, each time with the same message. Look at you humans. The assembly representative sneered through the video feed. Playing gardener with those walking weeds. Don't you know that real power comes from strength? Funny thing about gardens, Stone replied calmly. They feed people. What does your power feed except your ego? She cut the transmission before they could respond. These conversations always went the same way. On the moon's surface, Green Sky led a team of both moss people and human scientists. The humans wore protective suits, but the moss people needed only their natural abilities. Where they walked, life followed. The mineral transformation is proceeding faster than expected, Dr. Miller reported, checking her instruments. The moss people aren't just planting things. They're changing the fundamental structure of the ground itself. Green Sky's leaves rippled with pleasure. Yes, first we make the soil live, then it can support other life. He pressed his hand to the ground, and the others watched in amazement as grass sprouted from his fingertips, spreading out in a widening circle. A young moss person named Fresh Growth worked nearby with human botanists. They were developing new hybrid plants that could grow in environments neither species could handle alone. Already, their creations were proving more resilient than anyone had expected. The assembly called again. Stone's voice came through their communicators. Same old threats, but we got 3 more Earth ships arriving next week. Your work is safe here. Green Sky looked up at the Earth ships above. Such strange allies they had found. The humans weren't the strongest species in the galaxy, or the most advanced, but they understood something the assembly never had, the power of helping others grow. Back on Earth, the first fruits of the Alliance were already showing. Moss People advisors had helped transform struggling farmland into flourishing fields. Desert regions bloomed. The human population, which had been facing food shortages, now had hope for the future. Assembly ship approaching again, one of Stone's officers reported. But this one's different. Smaller. Not a warship. The ship that appeared was indeed unusual. It carried markings of one of the Assembly's smaller member races. Its captain's message was brief. We seek gardening advice. Stone smiled. It had begun, just as they'd predicted. The Assembly's power came from keeping its members dependent and afraid. But Earth and the Moss People were showing another way. Send them to the diplomatic team, she ordered. Let's show them what real strength looks like. As the sun set on Nexus 7, Green Sky and Dr. Miller watched their work spread across the horizon. Where there had been only dust that morning, now patches of green stretched for miles. They still mock us, Green Sky said quietly. They call us weak, call you foolish for protecting us. Miller laughed. Let them mock. In 6 months, this moon will feed millions. In a year, it will be a paradise. I'd like to see their weapons do that. Above them, more ships appeared, Earth vessels bringing supplies and protection, and now others too, smaller races curious about this new alliance. The Assembly's grip was slipping, one garden at a time. We're not warriors, Green Sky said, watching the ships. No, Miller agreed. We're something better. We're gardeners. And together, we're going to grow a whole new galaxy. Fresh Growth stood in Earth's largest agricultural research center, surrounded by rows of experimental crops. His leaves trembled with excitement as he placed his hands on a struggling wheat plant. The other scientists watched in amazement as he began to communicate with it. The plant is scared, he said softly. The soil here is different from what it knows, but I can help it understand how to adapt. Dr. Miller recorded everything on her tablet. 6 months into the alliance, they were still discovering new abilities the Moss People had kept hidden from the Assembly. Not only could they grow plants, but they could actually talk to them, understanding their needs at a cellular level. Another success, Miller announced, checking the readings. Crop yield is up 300% from last month. The plants are actually rewriting their own genetic code based on the Moss People's suggestions. The news spread quickly. On 3 different colony worlds, similar experiments were showing the same results. The Moss People weren't just gardeners. They were plant whisperers, capable of helping vegetation adapt to any environment. Admiral Stone received the reports with satisfaction. "Send this to Assembly World Nexus 12, she ordered her communications officer. "They're the ones who called our allies useless weeds last week." The Assembly's response came within hours. The same world that had mocked them was now requesting aid. Their main food production facility had failed, and millions were at risk of starvation. Should we help them? Fresh Growth asked when he heard the news. After all their cruelty. Yes, Green Sky said firmly. We help everyone. That's what makes us different from them. The Assembly officials couldn't hide their shame when the joint human-moss people aid mission arrived. They watched in silence as Fresh Growth and his team walked through their dying fields, speaking to the plants, teaching them how to thrive in the changing conditions. "I don't understand," one Assembly member said to Captain Reed. "We treated them like dirt. Why would they help us?" Reed smiled. "Because that's what strong people do. Real strength isn't about having the biggest weapons. It's about being able to help others, even when they don't deserve it." The success on Nexus 12 marked a turning point. Other Assembly worlds began to see the truth. They had spent centuries mocking their greatest possible allies. The Moss people's abilities weren't just useful. They were essential for the future of space colonization. Back on the first terraformed moon, Green Sky met with Earth's diplomatic team. The alliance had grown. 3 more species had joined, each bringing their own unique abilities to the partnership. "The Assembly is losing control," Stone reported during the meeting. "Their member worlds are starting to question everything. Why fight over resources when we can grow them? Why build weapons when we can build gardens? They'll try to stop us," one of the diplomats warned. "The Assembly leaders won't give up their power easily. Let them try," Green Sky said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "We've spent centuries hiding what we can do, afraid of their mockery. But now," he gestured to the flourishing world around them, "now they see our true strength." Outside the meeting room, Fresh Growth worked with human children, teaching them to hear the whispers of growing things. The children laughed in delight as flowers bloomed at their touch, understanding for the first time that the greatest power often comes in the gentlest forms. The Assembly had always thought strength meant the ability to destroy. But as they watched their member worlds turn one by one toward the Human-Moss People Alliance, they began to realize their mistake. True power had been growing right under their feet all along. The warning came from a small farming colony on the edge of human space. Plants were dying. Not just crops, but all vegetation. The news spread quickly as more reports came in from other worlds. Whatever this was, it was spreading. Green Sky's leaves had turned a pale, sickly color. Many of the moss people were falling ill. Dr. Miller worked frantically in her lab, analyzing samples from affected plants and her alien friends. "It's not natural," she announced to the Emergency Council. "This virus was engineered. It's attacking the basic building blocks of plant life, and because the moss people are plant-based. They're dying too," Admiral Stone finished grimly. She looked at the latest reports. 12 worlds affected now, millions of acres of crops destroyed, and the moss people, their greatest allies, were growing weaker by the day. Fresh Growth stumbled into the lab, his usual bright green now dull and gray. "I can hear them," he whispered. "The plants. They're screaming. They're so afraid." He collapsed, caught by Reed's quick hands. In the assembly halls, certain members watched with satisfaction. Their biological weapon was working better than they'd hoped. Soon, the upstart humans would learn their lesson about defying assembly authority. But they had underestimated both their targets. Even as they grew weaker, the moss people refused to give up. They connected with the dying plants, learning how the virus worked from the inside. Dr. Miller combined their insights with advanced human medical science, working day and night to find a cure. "The virus changes too fast," one scientist complained. "Every time we think we have it beaten, it mutates." "Then we'll change faster," Miller said firmly. She turned to Green Sky, who lay on a medical bed nearby. "Can you still connect with the plants?" Green Sky's voice was weak but determined. Yes, and we've learned something. The virus is strong, but it's not smart. It doesn't understand the one thing that makes plants truly powerful. Which is? Stone asked. Adaptation, Green Sky replied. Plants don't fight change. They embrace it. They become something new. Working together, human scientists and the remaining healthy moss people began a new approach. Instead of fighting the virus, they taught the plants to change, to become something the virus couldn't hurt. Fresh Growth, though barely able to stand, spent hours communicating with test plants. Remember, he told them, you are life itself. You have survived ice ages and fires and floods. This is just another change. The breakthrough came on the 7th day. In Miller's lab, a simple earth wheat plant did something impossible. It changed its own structure, becoming resistant to the virus. Within hours, the moss people were teaching this new ability to plants everywhere. Impossible, an assembly scientist exclaimed, watching their weapon fail. Plants can't just change their genetic code like that. They can now, Reed said with a smile, because they learned from the best teachers in the galaxy. The recovery was swift. As the plants adapted, the moss people regained their strength. Fields that had been brown and dead burst into new life. And this life was stronger, more resilient than before. Green Sky, his color returning to its healthy shade, stood with Admiral Stone watching a sunset over a restored field. They tried to destroy us, he said quietly. Instead, they made us stronger. Stone nodded. That's the thing about trying to destroy life. Life always finds a way to grow back, usually better than before. In the end, the virus that was meant to break the Alliance only proved why it was so powerful. Humans had the science, the moss people had the connection to life itself, and together they were more than either could be alone. The Assembly's weapon had failed, but more than that, it had backfired. Now everyone knew that the combined strength of humans and moss people could overcome any challenge. The galaxy would never be the same. The grand hall of the Assembly was no longer as grand as it used to be. Half the seats stood empty, their former occupants having left to join the growing Human Moss People Alliance. The remaining Assembly leaders watched in frustration as another delegation prepared to leave. The Rock Shapers of Granite 5 formally withdraw from the Assembly. Their ambassador announced, "We have seen what cooperation can achieve. We choose to stand with those who build rather than those who destroy." Admiral Stone and Green Sky welcomed them at the new Alliance headquarters on Earth's transformed moon. The Rock Shapers, a species that could mold stone like clay, had once been among the Assembly's strongest supporters. "They called us dirt movers for centuries," the Rock Shaper leader said, his crystalline form glinting in the sunlight. "But we watched what you did, how you helped everyone, even your enemies. We want to be part of that." The Alliance was growing faster than anyone had expected. The Moss People's terraforming abilities, combined with human protection, and now the Rock Shapers' skills, were transforming dead worlds into paradises at an unprecedented rate. Fresh Growth worked with a team of Rock Shapers, showing them how to make their stone formations perfect homes for different types of plants. "See how the roots can grow here," he explained. "Your curves and hollows create perfect microclimates." The Assembly tried everything to maintain control. They offered bribes, made threats, promised power. But their old tactics weren't working anymore. The galaxy had seen a better way. Another trade request, Captain Reed reported to the Alliance Council. This time from the Assembly's own capital world. They're offering military technology in exchange for terraforming services. Green Sky's leaves rustled with quiet laughter. How strange. They spent so long mocking us, and now they beg for our help. "Should we help them?" one of the council members asked. "Of course," Stone replied with a smile. "That's what we do. But this time, they'll have to play by our rules. No more bullying. No more mockery. If they want to be part of this, they have to learn to grow, not just take." The Assembly's leadership watched helplessly as their power crumbled. One by one, their member worlds were choosing gardens over weapons, cooperation over control. The very things they had mocked were now the most valuable resources in the galaxy. A young moss person named Dawnlight worked with children from 20 different species, teaching them the basics of plant communication. Among them was the child of an assembly leader, sent in secret to learn what their parent had publicly ridiculed. "The plants don't care where you're from," Dawnlight told them. "They only care that you want to help them grow. That's something anyone can learn if they're willing to listen." In orbit above them, ships from 100 worlds worked together. Earth vessels provided protection, Moss People ships transformed atmospheres, and rock shaper craft sculpted the terrain below. Species that had once fought each other now built together. Green Sky stood in the council chamber, looking at the map of known space. The green dots showing Alliance worlds now far outnumbered the red ones of Assembly control. "They're calling it the Great Growing," Reed said, joining him. "The biggest transformation in galactic history. And to think, they once called you useless." "The greatest changes," Green Sky replied, "often start with the smallest seeds." Around them, the galaxy was blooming into something new, something that the Assembly, with all its power and weapons, had never been able to imagine. A future built not on fear and mockery, but on the simple power of helping things grow. 5 years after the virus crisis, the galaxy gathered to celebrate the opening of the new Galactic Council headquarters. Unlike the old Assembly's dark, imposing structure, this building was a marvel of living architecture. Plants grew along its walls, their flowers blooming in all colors of the spectrum. The rock shapers had crafted its foundations from crystal that caught the light and sent rainbows dancing through the halls. Green Sky, now the elected head of the council, stood at the podium. His leaves had grown fuller, stronger, marked with the wisdom patterns of age. Beside him stood Admiral Stone, her hair now streaked with gray, but her eyes as sharp as ever. 10 years ago, Green Sky began. "We were a people without hope. The Assembly mocked us, called us worthless, tried to keep us weak." He paused, looking out at the gathered representatives of over 200 worlds. "But then we met humanity. They saw value where others saw weakness. They offered friendship where others gave only scorn." The last remnants of the Assembly sat in the audience too. Their once proud leaders now worked as equals with species they had previously despised. It had been a hard lesson, but a necessary one. Fresh Growth, now a senior teacher, led a group of mixed species students through the building's garden levels. "Feel the life around you," he instructed. "Every plant, every creature, has its own strength. Together, we make something greater than any of us could be alone." Dr. Miller, her lab coat now bearing the symbols of both Earth and Verdant, showed visitors the latest achievements of their combined science. "We've terraformed over 300 worlds," she explained. "But more importantly, we've learned to do it sustainably, creating ecosystems that can thrive on their own." In orbit above, ships from all species worked together in harmony. The former Assembly warships had been converted into massive garden vessels, their weapon ports now growing pods for transporting seedlings. Human engineering combined with Moss People biology and rock shaper architecture had created vessels that were themselves living worlds. The old Assembly believed that power came from making others feel small. Admiral Stone addressed the crowd. "They thought mockery and cruelty made them strong. But true strength, as our friends taught us, comes from helping others grow." Captain Reed, now commander of the Alliance's exploration fleet, reported discoveries of new worlds and new species almost weekly. But unlike the old days, these discoveries were met with offers of friendship and cooperation, not demands for submission. A small moss person child approached the Assembly's former high commander during the celebration. Instead of scorn, the old leader bent down to accept the flower the child offered. "I spent centuries fighting gardens," he said quietly. "Now my grandchildren are learning to grow them." The new Galactic Council chamber bloomed with life. Each member species had contributed something unique to its design. The result was a place where all could feel at home, where every voice could be heard. We look forward now. Green Sky concluded his speech, not to a future of conquest and mockery, but to one of growth and harmony. The galaxy once laughed at us for being peaceful. Now they understand that peace was our greatest strength all along. As the celebration continued, Earth and Verdant's flags flew side by side above the council hall. They were no longer just allies, but the foundation of something greater, proof that the unlikeliest friendship could change everything. The stars themselves seemed brighter now, shining down on a galaxy that had learned to grow instead of destroy, to build instead of break, to respect instead of mock. And somewhere, on a distant world, new seeds were taking root, reaching for those stars with hope instead of fear.